Hello, I'm Toka and welcome back to the second channel video. So surprisingly, a lot of people really enjoyed speaking about every metro system in Europe, and I think one of the big reasons for that is because if you live in a city, you've seen how a metro or metro style system can better connect a city, can allow you to get to more parts of the same city, and it just basically increases connectivity and makes it easier to travel both in terms of time, in terms of cost, and in terms of ease and all these other sorts of things. So when people hear about metros around a given city, the next obvious question is like, so what about a metro of a whole country? Why don't we have a UK-wide metro? Or a Germany-wide metro, or why don't we have a Europe-wide metro? And obviously the answer to that question is because that's not how that form of transport works, but the closest thing we do have is something which is heavily in the works right now, and that is high-speed rail all across the world. So first of all, let me introduce you to this map of high-speed rail countries across the world. This is basically just here to prove that, like, honestly, outside of the three largest economies, which is China, the EU, and the US, it's really, high-speed rail isn't a concept which is widely taken off just yet. You can see how, like, oh yeah, Russia, Turkey, and Japan have some, they're super densely populated countries in some parts, but for the most part, high-speed rail is something that really is a futuristic, high-tech concept that might go places, might not. So in today's video, I figured why not talk about exactly what the deal is with European high-speed rail, because we can talk about American high-speed rail, but it will take us all of about 5 seconds. Here's a map of the US rail network. Gray means not high speed, green means they're planning it at some point, maybe, and yellow means it's like the slow definition of high speed, with orange being the full definition. So as you can see, it's like, oh, so there's a little bit of yellow and a tiny bit of orange, and then you're kind of done with the country. There's also some stuff going on in Florida soon that's actually finished as of the recording of this video, but basically it's like, okay, so there's not really like high-speed rail in America, but what about in Europe? You see the same map in Europe and you get colors everywhere. So yeah, this is the map I want to kind of mostly talk about in today's video and talk about high-speed rail in Europe, which I hope you all do enjoy. So let's dive right into it, because when you immediately start looking at this map, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of colors going on, and you spot the very clear divide of like, that's the East-West Europe divide kind of again. And yeah, the simplest way to describe this one is like, yeah, you can very clearly see that there is a high-income kind of country requirement, or there is some, like, yeah, again, you need to be linking together two kind of high income or high business areas, or areas you expect will create high business, high income, high trade, high tourism, whatever else you're going for. That tends to be the key thing that links these things together. Because within the UK, for instance, you can see how, like, oh yeah, London to Edinburgh is mostly high speed, or again, it's the slower definition of high speed because it was built a long time ago. But you can see how, like, that makes a thing. But like the full-on definition, London to Paris, the two largest metropolitan areas, two large business everything sort of hubs, oh yeah, they're linked together super fast. It kind of makes sense like that. So yeah, the obvious thing you're seeing there is the East-West divide, but then within each country you see a trend that you might not expect, because the 5 largest countries by population and by GDP and by most measures you can think about are going to be the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, and they all have crazy high-speed rail networks, as you can see looking at this map. However, what I find interesting is the fact that Spain actually has the most of any non-China country. Spain has the most high-speed rail in the world. Look how much they've got going on: Madrid to Barcelona, Madrid to Malaga, Madrid to Seville, and with a whole bunch of other networks being built, as well as like Valencia. You can see just how much there is, and it's like proper new 300-kilometer-an-hour high-speed rail, which is like pretty good, impressive stuff. So they have the most high-speed rail. France has the fastest, again, counter to what you might expect, because if you look at, like, if you tried to, for instance, map out like where the first railway line in each country was, the UK invented it, and I guess like many things we invented, we're not very good at it anymore, but you can see how, like, oh yeah, the UK invented it. Germany was very close to follow, and one of the key things that determined a lot of Germany's strength over Austria and then over France during World Wars, etc., was the strength of their rail network. So you would assume, looking from this map back to this one, that they would be the 2 countries ahead, but actually it's kind of not the case. Germany is building a variety of high-speed rail networks and kind of transferring some across, but that's not really happened so much. So to kind of explain what the scoop is with this one is, I feel like let me first of all explain the whole kind of thing of, like, high-speed rail is actually 2 distinct things. For this whole video, I'm going to keep things simple and say high-speed rail, but it's really 2 separate, very unique things. One is making an existing train network have a minimum speed length, giving electrification, and making the trains go faster than they can already, and one is building dedicated track just for these high-speed trains. That second option is the one used in Japan for the Shinkansen. It's the one that makes most effective new rail routes, which makes exciting things like the really big colors you're seeing here, and that's why when you see a color like yellow in the UK, it's like, that's because they were upgraded in the 70s. It was quite an impressive thing. London to Glasgow is only a 4-hour journey, but it is still like, oh yeah, they're upgraded rail networks, they're still potentially prone to delays, etc. Whereas, when you see, the exciting purple, the reds, etc., they're generally speaking dedicated trains, which means less delays, easier signaling, etc. And interesting enough, actually, that's where we're going to bounce into our next point because, okay, five largest EU countries have the five largest networks, as you might expect, with Italy being the odd one out there. I would have assumed this based on many of the stereotypes or whatever, but when I went to Italy, high-speed trains are a big thing there. Like, oh yeah, Turin to Rome, for instance, you can do that on high-speed trains, and they've got a really modern network, so stereotypes, they don't apply to high-speed rail or whatever, if that's even a stereotype that's a thing. But yeah, surprisingly enough, I thought that was interesting. But also when you look around, it's like, okay, so what about like Sweden and, Norway, Finland? What's their excuse? Why is it between them, like Finland has a little bit and Sweden has a little bit, and Norway only has the tiniest bit around Oslo to the airport and then a bit south. And the simple explanation for that one is the fact that all three of these countries are very sparsely populated. Like, they all have one major city of close to 1 million people, or at least over 500,000. I know people get, like, upset, like, 660,000 is not near 1 million, so I can't. But, like, they have large cities, larger than the city you perhaps live in when you watch this video. They all have kind of one, and then it kind of gets sparse from there. Again, when we look back at the network for Norway, you can see how, like, they've got a few cities around the place, but it doesn't necessarily make sense to drop all that money connecting them by high-speed rail. So, as someone who has traveled around either the Nordics, maybe I can help you understand why maybe it is just yet. And part of that is, again, the demand isn't necessarily there, and the other part is that, so for Sweden, where they have a lot of yellow, but then not quite so much, which is the slowest form, but they don't have any faster, one of the logical connections would be like, why not have Stockholm to Oslo, or like, why not have Stockholm to Malmo, they're two big cities connected, and the answer is actually interesting because they have their own signaling system in Sweden, and it maximizes at 200. They're actually switching over onto the EU rail network, which will mean it will go faster, which is why lines like this one, in you can see there's some orange up there, it goes to Umeå, not a very big Swedish city. It's just kind of certified for 250 to be ready for this big changeover, so Sweden's going to improve at some point. But you can kind of see the point how, like, oh, that's kind of interesting right there. So, yeah, that's the deal with countries that have high-speed rail. Again, the UK is one of the worst, because none of this is really true high-speed, besides the link to France. France generally does a very good job, but they spent a lot of money and are in a lot of debt, as I understand it. They're a train company, I should say, the TGVs, it caused a lot of debt to build all these sorts of lines. Germany is a much more balanced approach, but therefore, again, most of their big cities aren't very well connected by rail. Like, it takes 4 hours from Berlin to Frankfurt, the two, big places you might want to connect, for instance. And you can kind of see how every, high-speed rail network, even in the most developed countries, it's a work in progress. So what about the countries where it's not? So, first of all, Poland, as of recording this video, I believe they have some high-speed rail now, but it's either not properly going at the speeds or it's not certified. There's some delays in that. Poland is the next logical step of like, hey, connecting up all their cities, it's going to happen, it's going to get linked into Berlin, etc., etc. And then the obvious next connections, the ones that are kind of least obvious, but also are happening anyway, is Rail Baltica. If you don't know, so if we look at the map, for instance, the EU goes all the way up to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and I think it would make sense to better connect them to the rest of the EU, because they're very much integrated on a economic level. The economic convergence, between these countries and between Poland and between Germany, it increases on a very fast rate. So one of the logical steps is why not have some high-speed rail? So Rail Baltica, if you watch my big mega projects in the EU video, maybe you're familiar with it. It's an attempt to hook up Berlin to Warsaw, which is, again, already done to some extent. Again, the exact specifics of, like, why these things... the high-speed rail requires a lot of different things, which I'm simplifying for this video. Like, you need to have those signals be perfect, because when you're going that fast, things get a bit crazy. You need to have dedicated traffic patterns. You need to have trains certified for that, and you need to have all these different things, gradients, curves, but... Long story short, they're also going to be connecting up to Riga. They're going to be connecting up to Vilnius, and they're going to be connecting up to Tallinn. And this was an interesting, like, two-dimensional, like, oh yeah, did you know high-speed rail is coming to all three of these cities? But actually, after that video I produced, something interesting happened, that the Rail Baltica CEO resigned and condemned the government for playing poker. I just found that, like, hugely interesting. Of like, whoa, like, that, that whole big project, the huge thing to hook up the Balkans into, the Baltics. I hope I didn't say Balkans before, a bit into Europe. That is something which is, being kind of going rough, because they especially accused Latvia of being like, hey, Latvia has not made the necessary decisions, and Lithuania is not doing a very good job, which is, personally, I find that kind of wild, that, like, there is drama in the railway situation in Europe, and if you want to get angry at something, I don't know, get angry at Latvia, apparently, screwing up high-speed rail for the Baltics, darn you, Latvia. But no, more seriously, looking back at the map, though, you can see how, like, okay, that's the logical next connections, and that's the kind of thing there. So what about all the other countries? Like, okay, so you can see how, like, Austria, Switzerland, they're countries with a little bit of high-speed rail. What about, the Czech Republic? And the Czech Republic, it's a bit misleading to have it all be grey here. They have a high-ish speed rail network. I think it's called higher speed. It's just not quite high speed yet. At some point, you will now no doubt see that properly, be upgraded and etc. It just doesn't make sense right now. When you look at, Hungary, it's one of those similar, Hungary. It's one of those similar situations where it's like, oh yeah, at some point, this is a thing that will be improved, but like right now isn't necessarily seen as the perfect time for that. But you can see the basis for a lot of these future expansion and improvement routes. Like, oh yeah, there's this big peninsula down here, southeastern Europe. It would make sense to have Romania and Bulgaria and all of the other Eastern European countries probably hooked up by some cross-European high-speed rail line, except kind of not at the same time. So one of the most famous rail lines in Europe, you can still see on this map, from Istanbul going all the way slowly up into London or to Paris. I think it goes to both. I think it used to be called the Orient Express. There's no longer a train that runs that route because no one wants to take your 24-hour train when you can just take a plane in 3.5 hours. But like, there's a famous route there, the Orient Express. Hercules Poirot solved a murder in there once in the famous movie. I think it's called the Orient Express. Although it probably shouldn't be called the Orient Express because there's no Orients at the end. But my point being here is the problem with a rail like that starting up, the reason the journey stopped and the reason it won't probably start again is because it costs a lot to have a train go for 24 hours, like the staff costs, etc., on a 2,500 kilometer journey. And even if we have the fastest high-speed rail that we have in Europe on that whole thing, if we manage to upgrade this entire route to be as good as this purple line right here, that's still an 8-hour journey, and the 8-hour train versus, say, a 3-hour flight, it doesn't tempt enough people over. The reason, when it comes to so where should you actually expect new high-speed rail in Europe? The simple answer to the question is in countries where it makes sense. The golden thing that is said by most rail executives, whether you trust them or not is up to you. The big kind of time difference is if you have a 4-hour or less train, it generally eats up into the share of the airlines operating the route. Because right now, the thing that keeps Europe connected is flights. And funnily enough, the largest airline in Europe is Ryanair. So the thing keeping the EU better financially, economically, or maybe you can even say culturally connected, is the flights, and arguably is Ryanair, so keep that in your thing. But no, basically, more and more flights keep Europe better integrated with other parts of Europe. The fastest way to get from anywhere to somewhere else is probably a flight right now, except if the train journey is under 4 hours. So obviously this has to be a high-speed rail journey of under 4 hours. If it takes 4 hours to go from London to Cardiff, you probably still might fly it because 4 hours for a journey, that's short. But if it's a high-speed rail journey, then it often can make sense. So for instance, the Eurostar recently launched services from London to Amsterdam to show on a map of the trains. It goes via this, goes up to Amsterdam, takes 3.5 hours, and even though the flight is 40 minutes, a lot of people have started taking the train, and that's a really weird edge case because we're talking about literally taking a continent-wide diversion. But it makes sense. It can compete. It does compete. If you look at London to Paris, it's a 40-minute flight or a 2-hour train. Most of the traffic on that route goes to the train because why would you fly? Every time I go to Paris, I take the train. It just doesn't make any humanly sense to fly that one unless you have some weird reason to want to use the airline. But whenever that a similar example is Madrid to Barcelona, all of these very, very popular routes, they're the ones where high-speed rail makes sense for two reasons. One, because the environment, like sending planes when you can send a more efficient method, say an electrically powered train, it just doesn't necessarily make so much sense for that reason. I've said this before, I'm very pro flying as a means to connect people, but it doesn't mean it's the only way that you should. If you can have a better method to connect people, why not use that instead? So, the environment's a big one, but actual arguments, fun ones, would be stuff like, oh yeah, the business connectivity. If people can connect between the two cities better, say London to Amsterdam without flying, the people who don't want to fly can now do it a lot better, but also the people who do fly but just hate that it's get to the airport 2 hours early, do this, do that, they can now take the train, for instance, and this is the big thing that kind of decides where the new rail networks make sense right now. I think a cross-Europe high-speed rail wouldn't be used very much exclusively end-to-end. Sofia to London wouldn't have many people deciding to take that via train, but I like the idea of having more of these short journeys connected better up. Like I said, Berlin to Prague to Vienna to Budapest is a line that makes perfect sense of 4 capital cities. like that you connect up within a few hours, you can eliminate a lot of this need for intra-European flights. You can better connect up the economies, the better connect up the etc. by using this sort of method. And that's something you can see when you look at the under constructions and when you look at the things people want to do, that, yeah, this is the stuff that happens in those parts. So another interesting way to look at this, like, where can you expect to see more high-speed rail besides, like, oh yeah, eventually improving some of the yellow lines around here and eventually taking some of the greys into the red or the purple or to the orange, whatever color you want to look at it as. But like, what else? Where can you expect to see this happen most? And I think the logical step to look at, which I think most people never mention, I think when you bring up high-speed rail in the news, the media, etc., it always comes up as like, oh yeah, that should happen from your regional town to somewhere you like to go. But on an actual practical level, the way to look at this is a financially viable investment, because high-speed rail costs a lot of money. You need to get the money back in passenger fares or in terms of economic productivity. Hooking up, say, let's just pick two random cities. Umeå in Sweden to, I don't know, Trondheim in Norway. It's going to cost you lots of billions, and there's not going to be a huge increase. It would be great if there was some reason to, but you need to have a reason before you have a way. And so I feel like the best way to make sure you're making financially sound projects, because even the Shinkansen, the famous Japanese project, it eventually crashed because they kept building regional routes for places no one wanted to go, but people liked the idea of having trains there. So fun fact, that's why Japan's high-speed rail network had issues and still kind of does. But basically, if you want to look at like where this makes the most sense, look up the list of busiest passenger air routes within the EU or within Europe. This is just within the EEA, the single market or whatever, and it's like, okay, Toulouse to Paris, so really, or just to Paris, let's just say Paris to Toulouse. Oh, and they built a high-speed rail, and passengers have mostly gone down, or at least stayed steady, as opposed to you look at a route which doesn't have a proper connection via high-speed rail, Trondheim to Oslo, which again, they connect by rail, but not high-speed rail, it's not very fast. Oh, that's going up year on year. It's gone up 15% in the last 5 years alone, or from 2011 to 2016, because the data's old. When you look up, say, Munich to Hamburg, it's connected by rail, but it's not properly high speed, and it's not a very direct connection. To show you both these routes, by the way. Here is Oslo to Trondheim, as you can see, long and slow. Here is Munich, the heart of Bavaria, to Hamburg. As you can see, it's indirect, slow, not all high speed. And this is where you can really tell which routes grow and which ones don't. If there is a high-speed rail competitor, you can lower the amount going by air, while also significantly you can lower the amount going by air while increasing the amount going, period. The amount going in total will increase, while the amount in the air goes down. The environment gets a boost, and business does too. How does that work? Magic is how, basically. I mean, that's probably not a very, very good sales pitch. But yeah, so you can look up here, the most logical routes for a high-speed rail. So again, Madrid to Barcelona, look how low that went down. And again, you might be like, okay, someone once said to me, oh, it really sucks that, so someone made the argument that they shouldn't build a bridge from, I think it's from Fehmarn to Denmark, because, and the big argument is the ferry companies will lose some jobs, and it's like, that's such a short way of thinking about things. But in the case of like, oh no, won't the airlines be hurt? Oh no, what if the airlines make less money because people are traveling in a faster, more environmentally efficient and better for the economy way? Oh, what a loss that would be to the world. And I like airlines, I fly a lot, you probably worked out. But here's the thing, what tends to happen in most of these countries is the airlines find a way to work into that. So, for instance, Iberia has a huge hub at Madrid, Iberia is the Spanish national airline. They have a code share agreement with the trains where they send people to Madrid and then put them on a train to Barcelona. The train gets extra customers, and the airline gets to sell tickets to Barcelona, which they otherwise would have to have a connection via, which they'll make less money by. So that works for them. Both of those players are a winner. Same with, if you don't know, the German Deutsche Bahn, the ICE network, that hooks into Lufthansa. If you want to take a flight to Aachen, they have an airport, but it's mostly budget flights, if you want to take a flight to Dusseldorf, or to a lot of weird cities which have like small regional airports, but you want to fly with just one connection, what they often do is they have flights, which are just trains, going from Frankfurt to Cologne, to all of these different places. And just weird fun fact you might not know, is that if you buy, this is actually a useful travel advice, so this is interesting, like in terms of how it works, but also pro tips of ToyCat, throw it in there. If you buy a ticket with Lufthansa, for, I think it's only 39 euros extra, you can go to any station within Germany. I think the same is true for Belgium. The same is partially true for France. It's not true in the UK, but it's also true in Spain for certain routes. this is a crazy useful fact if you're going on tourism and you want to get the most value out of something. But it's also just like, oh yeah, so now the rail company wins, and the airline gets to take a small cut on something they never really had to sell. So yeah, if you look at this route and you're like, oh no, the airlines are going to lose these millions of passengers, they lose them, but then they gain some back, and again, everything cycles round and it wins. So yeah, the logical ones looking at this list that haven't been served properly are mostly actually within Scandinavia. So, Catania to Rome kind of makes some sense, right? Okay, there's islands. If you look at like Barcelona to Mallorca, I always get confused. Is Mallorca the island? I think it is, right? I want to say it is. But yeah, you can see how, wait, actually, one sec. All I know is there's a billion like islands in Spain, there we go. This is Mallorca. It's like, I don't think a high-speed rail does make sense there. Good idea, for having a flight there instead. However, when there isn't an island getting in the way, you should totally go ahead and do these sorts of things. So like, Frankfurt to Berlin. Look how many passengers are increasing using it every year. Just makes sense, right? Stuff like London to Dublin. I mean, that'd be a fun one, but it's not increasing so much. Where you can see this huge demand increasing, you should probably go ahead and replace it. But yeah, most of these routes that do fit the criteria I just mentioned are either in the Scandinavian peninsula, so Copenhagen to Oslo, hugely increasing every year, 20% in 5 years. Stockholm to Oslo, hugely increasing, about 15% in 5 years. And these are huge numbers. More and more people are traveling between these places. And rather than saying, they're doing it in a bad way, why not make them do it in a better way for you and for them? And yeah, so in case you're curious, by the way, the routes I would recommend, the routes that Dr. Toycat with his PhD and looking at Google Maps right here would totally give a recommendation for. Copenhagen, Oslo, Stockholm. Make a triangle of high-speed rail. Right now, you can go from Copenhagen to Stockholm. Takes 5 hours. Same from Oslo. I think it's 6 hours. I've taken that journey before, but at the end of it, I was like, man, that was 5.5 hours. That was beautiful. It was nice. It was calm. The train tilts. It's nice. But that was too long. I'll take a flight next time I want to go from those two cities. I've taken a train from Oslo to Bergen. It was 6 hours. It was the most beautiful train ride of my life, but still, probably a bit too long. I only took it because it was cheap, and it was like a first-class train for like £22. I don't know how they're making money. In fact, I know they're losing a lot of money because even like the staff costs are significantly higher on a 6-hour train. My point here is that the longer the train, the more expensive it can be in different ways. The shorter the train, the higher the initial cost, and there is more maintenance, etc. But the more economic growth you can drive, the more economic convergence you can drive between regions. And I think, honestly, a high-speed rail network across Europe, across the EU, across anything like that, is something that is just a matter of time more than anything else. So, yeah, I think you can expect to see, more of these routes turn into colours. And I think Europe is one of the next logical places for high-speed. However, again, I would say that, for instance, if you look at, if you look at this map and we're like, okay, everything should go yellow, I think, honestly, every 10 to 20 years, you see another huge step forward. Like, the UK rail network was super fast in the 70s, now it's slow by high-speed rail network standards. So, I think, rather than improving them every 40 years, I think we wait until maglev trains are the standard, and then we make some of these really long-distance things possible. Like, the journey from, Copenhagen all the way down to Barcelona. If that was a journey you wanted to target, you should wait until there's super high speed, because a hyperloop or a floating train system, or whatever kind of magnet/air/pressure system you want to have, when that works properly, when that is properly in force and happening, that is the thing you need to be excited for. That's the thing that will change things in a lot of different ways. Until then, the 3.5 to 4 hour kind of journey max is how you should focus on high-speed rail. And anyway, with that said, thank you very much for watching this video. I just kind of wanted to rant about trains for 24 minutes. So I guess if you enjoyed that, then come check out my other videos where I sometimes also rant about trains for slightly more or less than 24 minutes. And Geography of Toycat, it'll be back soon. I'm just here to talk about trains today. And we'll talk about like populated countries, density, etc. Oh, wait, should have mentioned this at the start. But I really would like to hire an editor for this channel. I don't do a good job of editing. On this channel, I don't edit because I hate it. This is a fun channel. But even when I do edit videos on this channel, I hate it, and I do a bad job. It's the worst type of work, like doing a job you hate, not a good thing. Doing a job you hate badly, not a good thing for anyone. So I recently hired an editor on the main channel, like a guy who just watched the videos, knew what he was doing. He's really good. He sometimes helps with ideas, and I feel like I've significantly improved the output there. So if you watch these geography videos, you have any form of video editing talent, or you just want to give it a go, not a girl. Don't give my videos a girl. I mean, if you want to put a girl here, feel free to. She can go over there. But give it a go. And, or send me an email, ibxtoycat@gmail.com. Obviously, this will be on some form of paid basis. You've seen how much the channel can make on a good month, so less than that, preferably, because I'd rather not run this channel at a loss. If you're curious, by the way, the last month, I want to say it's been like $200 or something. But my point here is, if you can edit videos and you're willing to do so at a price that doesn't make me cause a loss, because I'd like to work with someone who wants to make cool stuff, who wants to educate people with fun edits, and wants to piece together some cool piece of content, and maybe work together on making something better. Like, there's a lot of big concept videos that I just can't do because it's outside my skill set. So if you have video editing skills, or you'd like, I mean, ideally you should have them already because learning takes a long time, but if you have video editing skills, you'd like to maybe help out and maybe get paid, send me an email, or just edit this video in an interesting way and then send that to me. Because honestly, it's hard to work out who does have skills and who doesn't. So, easiest way to do that would be if you email me with your talents. Goodbye. Wait, second channel. Don't care. Now goodbye.